Welcome viewers, you're now watching HornbillTV. It begins thousands of kilometers away in the Pacific Ocean. But if scientists are right, its consequences could eventually reach homes, farms and cities across the world. The World Meteorological Organization, or WMO, says there is a high probability that El Nino conditions could develop during the second half of 2026. Forecast models suggest the changes and the chances rise significantly between June and August and could persist into the later months of the year. So why are scientists paying such close attention? The answer lies beneath the ocean's surface. Researchers have detected unusually warm waters building up deep within the tropical Pacific. Think of it as a stored energy waiting to be released. If that heat continues to rise and spread, it could strengthen the developing El Nino and intensify its effects. Experts are careful not to sound the alarm too early, but it is still impossible to say exactly how powerful this event may become. But the warning signs are significant enough to warrant preparation. But before understanding what could happen next, we first need to understand the phenomenon at the center of it all. So what exactly is El Nino? To understand the concern, it is important to understand what El Nino actually is. In simple terms, El Nino is a naturally occurring climate pattern that disturbs the Pacific Ocean's normal weather system. Under usual condition, trade winds push warm ocean waters westward towards Indonesia and Australia, allowing cooler, nutrient-rich water to rise near South America. But every few years, those winds weaken, and as they lose strength, the warm water shifts back towards the central and eastern Pacific, setting off a chain reaction in the atmosphere. It may sound like a subtle change in ocean temperatures, but it is enough to alter rainfall patterns, shape storm tracks and trigger weather extremes in different parts of the world. Some regions receive excessive rainfall and flooding, while others may face prolonged dry spells and worsening drought. If that sounds like a distant scientific phenomenon, think again, because what begins in the Pacific does not stay in the Pacific. And that's where this story shifts from climate science to everyday life. Who could be affected by this? The short answer, almost everyone. Farmers may face uncertainty over rainfall and crop yields. Fishing communities could see disruptions to marine ecosystem and fish stocks. Government may come under pressure to manage food supplies, healthcare systems and disaster response efforts. And for ordinary families and ordinary common people, the effect could eventually be felt through rising food prices, water shortages and extreme weather events. Which is why scientists say this is not just an ocean story. It is a story about livelihoods, economies and daily life. But understanding who could be affected is only one part of the story. The bigger question many experts are now asking is, just how severe could this become? And what is the biggest concern? The concern is not simply that El Nino could return. It is the concern that this one could become particularly powerful. And if that happens, different parts of the world could face very different crises at the same time. One country could be battling severe drought and water shortages. Another could be grappling with devastating floods brought on by unusually heavy rainfall. Heat waves could become more intense, wildfire risk could increase, and food production could come under pressure. While none of these outcomes are certain, experts say the possibility is serious enough to prepare for rather than ignore. Because what begins as an ocean phenomenon can quickly evolve into an economic, agricultural and humanitarian challenge. And perhaps that's the biggest lesson from this developing story. El Nino may be a natural climate cycle, but understanding it early gives countries a chance to prepare before it affects and the effects are felt. Heat waves could become more frequent and more dangerous, Wildfire risk could increase, agricultural production could decline, pushing up food prices and placing additional strain on already vulnerable communities. We've now reached the end of this report, but before we wrap up, let's see what do we actually know so far from this. And so what is confirmed is that El Nino conditions are developing in the tropical Pacific, with the United Nations World Meteorological Organization warning of an 80% chance of its emergence between June and August 2026, rising to around 90% later in the year. Scientists have also detected unusually warm water beneath the Pacific, which could fuel this event and influence weather patterns across the globe. Now, what remains uncertain, however, is just how powerful this El Nino will become. Predictions of a monster El Nino, claims that it could be the worst in 150 years, or suggestions that countries like India are certain to face drought. This sort of information are not established scientific facts. They are based on historical comparisons and also on climate models and expert interpretations. And also not forgetting official forecasts. But in other words, the threat is real, but the scale of its impact is still unfolding. The science calls for vigilance, not panic. And as experts continue to monitor the Pacific closely, preparedness may prove far from important than prediction.